Welcome to the Hill with Jill podcast. I'm your host, Jill Yiter. Each week, I share one short, digestible episode to help you create clarity and ease in your wellness story. I'll be exploring self-care, intuition, mindfulness, intentional living, and more. If you enjoy a fresh perspective, agree that life is not black and white, and want to improve your relationship with yourself, then you're in the right place. Hi, it's Jill. Welcome to episode 14 of the Hill with Jill podcast. And I thought that maybe it would be nice if I just took a minute to share with you what I've been doing over the past few months, because you may have noticed that I haven't been producing content regularly. And that is because I actually decided to start work as a teacher aide at the local high school. And so that has taken up a good bit of my time and my mental energy as I've adjusted to that new shift. And hopefully I will be able to start producing some content again regularly as I get more and more adjusted to that job. And so it's been really interesting because with the current state of things in the world, just to give you a little bit of an update, in New Zealand, we've just started, we're into, I guess, almost through the first week of a 4-week, what the Prime Minister here is calling a lockdown. And so literally the whole nation is like on quarantine status. Only essential services are open. And it's just, it's an interesting, weird, kind of freaky and unique time, I guess. And along with all of that comes heaps of uncertainty, and kind of depending on your worldview and just lots of things, I guess, you can have feelings about this one way or another, and how it's like affected your income and your family and your current living situation and everything. Everyone's situation is going to be really unique. I feel super lucky because both my husband's and my income have remained intact during this 4-week period. And for me, it's actually been a little bit of a gift because it's a chance to reconnect to creating some content, just some more self-care that kind of got neglected while I was in the thick of adjusting to work outside of my house. And just to kind of take a moment to step back and breathe, I guess. So it's like forced stillness to me. And that's something that I strive for anyway, and that I really value, and that had kind of gotten away from me a bit, I guess. So in many ways, I'm certainly not, happy that we're dealing with a world pandemic. Don't get me wrong. I take it very seriously, and it's not something that, is to be made light of, but there's still like the raw reality of how on a very individual basis that can affect you in your day-to-day goings on for what hopefully in the bigger picture of things is kind of a short moment in time. So, with that said, I thought it was appropriate to share maybe just my thoughts about how to stay focused and how I stay focused when things feel really uncertain. I felt like I was already dealing with a good bit of uncertainty before any of this happened, because our living situation has been very up and down. We rent this cute little house, and we were given, like back in November, a 20-day notice that we needed to move. And then that actually was retracted. And then we had made plans to kind of move anyway a bit later on, but then that fell through based on world events. And so my kind of baseline of certainty for my self was already feeling quite shaky to begin with. So in a weird way, I at least know, like for the next 3 weeks anyway, that I will be living here. And so there's a weird kind of sense of security even in just knowing, okay, that's what's happening for the next 3 weeks. Um, so one thing that I think is kind of interesting, like a perspective to think about this from, is to just kind of stop and check in with yourself and notice how you are feeling personally about what's going on. And so by that, I mean, I don't mean like regurgitating what you have been watching or repeating what someone else has said or how they're feeling. Because there's kind of, I guess I view that there's kind of a couple things that can be going on. There's actually your very unique set of circumstances, and I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about needs, and then your very unique set of needs right now at this moment in time. And then there's kind of like this group think mentality. And I've become more and more just maybe even attuned to that. So working at the high school, there's that very clear example of like how that kind of peer mentality or that group think mentality can take over. It almost becomes like its own entity, and it overrides like individuals' ability to think and make decisions on their own based on their own needs, wants, and desires. And so, and I suppose that that's really relevant like in high school, but it doesn't go away as adults either. Like in high school, I know there's so much desire to feel accepted by your peers at that age, but I don't know that that ever really goes away. So just take a moment and maybe think about, what are your actual feelings about what is going on in the world right now? What is your actual perspective on how your day-to-day life has been affected for better or worse? And then maybe notice just what doesn't belong to you, which is just kind of group clutter that you've picked up on and maybe taken in to your belief system or taken on board based on the fact that it's just there. Or maybe you've been, over consuming information, so to speak, and not fully being aware of how that's like infiltrating your boundary system in a way. So, yeah, sometimes it's just not easy to take kind of stock of where you are in relation to the group or to the status quo. So I think this is maybe a bit relevant as well. I've been taking an online art therapy class, and it actually has come in handy because I've been able to use some of it with my son while he stays entertained and kind of focused in a learning mode at home during this time. So one of the most recent lessons centered around, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you're not familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's like this pyramid of core needs that basically all human beings have. And so at the bottom of that pyramid is your physiological needs, like having fresh air to breathe, having clean water to drink, having food to eat. And then we move up to the second level, which is safety. So that could include like having like secure employment, or at least the perception of it, I guess you could argue that, and then having some stability to your financial life. And then the next level up is love and belonging, and that addresses like having connections with people that you care about. And then as you move up the list, there's like self-esteem and then self-actualization. And so what's going on right now in the world is really kind of impacting a lot of people's most basic level of needs, their physiological needs. So even just kind of the real or perceived access to food, even if that's just something as simple as like a food that you normally have available to you that's not, even though there's still enough to eat. And then many people's income has been impacted. And so their sense of financial safety and security has been really impacted. And when those basic core needs are not feeling met, it's no joke. Like the stress that that creates on your whole being is, yeah, it's serious. It's no joke. And like, to be honest, all you can really do is like put one foot in front of the other and be kind to yourself, because you have to meet yourself where you are and within your current set of circumstances, but it's extremely difficult. So just take a moment and maybe in relationship to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, think about what is maybe unmet for you right now. So if you have access to fresh air, clean water, and food, then your physiological needs are met, and that's really lucky. And then the next level up, think about safety. Is your income intact? Has your employment remained kind of flexible and unshaken, or has that taken a hit? And then love and belonging. That's, people, we have all kinds of creative online ways to connect, but there really is nothing that can replace like direct, like human interaction, like skin to skin contact, even if it's just like a hug or a pat on the back. That is kind of its own unique form of love and belonging. So just take a moment and recognize which of those needs are not all the way met. And then maybe think about if your needs assessment is congruent with your personal reality, or is it actually, as you've gone through that step, has it actually been more aligned with that group think mentality, like I mentioned? So maybe the group think or the mob mentality is saying there is nothing to eat. And maybe when you actually stop and assess that on a personal level, it could be more accurate. Like, well, some things. So for example, for me, if I was going to be really honest, there's like the panic layer, but then there's the layer underneath that is like, okay, there's actually still heaps of food at the grocery store. There may not be any flour to bake with right now, but that's just one thing. I might have to stand in line to get into the grocery store if it's a particularly busy time, because there's only so many people allowed in the store at once, but it's still accessible. And so just kind of getting very accurate and hone in on what's actually going on for you. And so if your needs assessment leads you to, excuse me, a place of understanding that your needs are actually met for the most part, and you are simply mistaking a lot of confusion about what's yours and what's the group think mentality, then what I'm going to share with you can actually become really important to help you get refocused and align with what is important and how to stay on track during this next chunk of time, however long it is. So, a good place to maybe start is to begin with the end in mind. So if you ask yourself maybe a few questions about how you would like to use this gift of time that you've been granted. And so I recommend kind of, again, approaching it from a needs assessment level. And I'm going to maybe just get your brainstorm juices flowing by sharing with you kind of what some of my personal needs are that I identified. So I have a need for fresh air daily, even if the weather is not ideal. I have a need to keep my son engaged in quality experiences. I have a need to contribute something of value to my online community. I have a need to make something physical on most days, whether that's just like a card or something to eat. I have the need to take at least 3 20-minute movement breaks a day. So that can be kind of flexible, but I definitely need, and I was lucky because I already knew this about myself from before I started back to work when I was home and really in control of my whole time. I found that more frequent interspersed movement breaks were more helpful than like one long sustained movement break. And a need to talk to a friend on most days, and a need to maintain a clutter-free and clean living space, and a need to take screen breaks. And so for me, that's actually really important. And that means that depending on how the day has gone and how much device time I've already had doing other things, it could mean that my need to get off of all devices is actually more important than my need to talk to someone. So just paying attention to what need is most important at any given moment in time. And so then it can become really helpful to identify your resources. So, for example, one resource is that we are lucky and we've identified that our family income has stayed intact. Another resource is that there's lots of nice places to walk close to us, that I've curated a collection before quarantine started, that I'm lucky to have a good supply of art supplies and things to just kind of stay on track that way. And that I have the infrastructure in place to deliver online or digital content still. And so after you've kind of identified your core needs and your resources, then you might want to identify some of your triggers. So I'll just give you an example. Some of my triggers include going to the grocery store, and that's just the way it is right now. That's a stress trigger. Too much media, and I've already known that about myself for some time. So I've always really limited that, and now is no different. That's not to say don't stay informed from high quality sources, but just kind of mindless media consumption is super not helpful for me. And something else that I've really noticed is a trigger for me is consuming too much of anything rather than creating. So if I'm doing like too much, if I'm out of balance in my life, there's a good chance that I'm over consuming other people's content and not minding my own business, creating my own. And another real trigger for me is any like quote helpful message about what I should be doing with my time right now. I find that all, just to be honest, kind of shockingly unhelpful, even if it's kind of well-intentioned. And trying to predict any kind of outcome right now is unhelpful, and that's a trigger for me. So if I try and predict an outcome about my retirement account, or if I try and predict an outcome about the exact day that I'm going to go back to work, or my son's going to go back to school, or if I try and predict an outcome about any of it, then that just gets me down a whole train of thought about things that I can't control and things that are not going on right now. And then basically too much device time, and then anything that has an underlying message of don't trust yourself. So if it is some content or something that's coming that I've chose to take part in, it's usually because there's an underlying message of you're competent, you know how to manage your time, trust yourself, only you know your unique set of circumstances. It kind of starts from that place, and then it builds gently upon that. And then another real trigger for me are just endless conversations that are not focused on ownership of your feelings. So just circular conversations about politics or how something is being handled that maybe we don't have control over, instead of just owning the baseline, which is something as simple as like, I feel like this really sucks and it's causing me to feel really unsafe and out of control, because that can actually be like okay, then let's support that, versus just like constant talk about external things. So, something that I think is really helpful for me is then kind of based on all of this information, my needs identification, my resources that I've identified, and the triggers that I've identified, I then create a flexible routine. And flexible is the key, because even like in this situation right now, the weather kind of rules the show, so to speak. So if it's a particularly nice day, then I'm going to have more focus outside and things can kind of shift and be a bit fluid. But you're going to basically use your core needs to set the backdrop for each of your time blocks that you allocate. So, and then you get to decide how frequently you want that time block to reoccur. And you can use anything that you find helpful. I mean, you can use like a weekly planner. You can use just a blank piece of paper. You can use something like Asana or Google Calendar. The thing that I don't really like about Google Calendar is that it's very specific. It feels kind of locked into me. It's like, oh, I've scheduled it. The thing that I like about pen and paper is that it has a more kind of brainstorm type quality to it. So it maybe brings in that element of flexibility. And that could just be the way that I perceive it. It's not to say that it's actually the case for everyone. So, another suggestion that I have is just to, excuse me, I'm just going to reach and grab a tool that I realized I had. So this is just an example of an online, or excuse me, a weekly calendar. So that's a really simple planning tool that would be super helpful right now, even if you identified just some core things like, maybe Monday is like the day that you focus on food. And so that's like go to the grocery store, clear out the fridge, prep everything. Maybe Tuesday is the day that you focus on keeping your space tidy, for example. Or you might even just decide that you prefer to have shorter bursts, excuse me, rather than a main focus for the day. So it's really dependent on what suits you. But again, my underlying point is that whatever time blocks you set up for yourself and however often they repeat through the week, is that they're directly driven by whatever you have identified as your underlying needs. So if I have identified, for example, an underlying need as being fresh air every day, then 7 days a week, that's going to be on my reoccurring flexible routine, which is as simple as get outside for fresh air. It doesn't need to be so detailed that it's like have a walk or garden. It can be anything, but it's just get outside for fresh air. And so if you make, I know what else I was going to say. So I also really value kind of alternating activities that are still and then an activity that has movement. So maybe I have like some stillness where I'm creating some online content. And then the next time block will be something where I'm moving around. And that could, again, also be satisfying that get outside requirement that I have, or it could not be, depending on lots of factors. So, I also try to build in environmental changes. So something that I feel like I enjoy is just making the use of my space. And we've always lived places that are quite small. So, for example, like in our tiny little kitchen, I just moved the table and the chairs. And I've always, like, not just for this cycle of life right now, but for as long as I can remember, I've always just created little nooks and crannies around my home where I can do different activities. So I'll move the table and chairs. Like this morning, I did a kickboxing class in there. I just put my laptop up on the fridge. It's nice because it's like at eye level. And then in the evening, I usually have a ground movement practice in my bedroom. And so My bedroom is actually set up in such a way that there's always a place for my mat to go on the floor. And I have a little side table that's kind of the right eye level for my device. Again, if I'm going to be following along to like a yoga class or a ground-based movement class or something, or sometimes I just choose, if I've had enough device time, but I still want some movement, I'll just do my own thing. And I am kind of lucky because I have the gift of a lifetime history, I guess, of being comfortable just moving and improvising. And as a Pilates instructor, that kind of comes with the territory as well. But yeah, so just kind of creating like some stillness and then some movement, and then trying to build in those small environmental changes. So if you think of like being on a really long flight, like a transatlantic flight, and the way that the flight attendants are good at kind of creating the illusion of breaking up that very long period of time in a confined space by things like as simple as, okay, now we're having a drink of water. Now we're having happy hour. Now we're having a movie. Now we're having, a snack break. Now we're having dinner. Now we're having a hot towel to put on our face. Those things actually are so important to just kind of break up that monotony. And so even something like changing your clothing, having like a costume change, it may seem silly, but I think I've actually talked about this before, or at least meant to, but literally like just having a clothing change, like put on your work clothes and sit at your computer and work, and then put on your fitness clothes and do that, and just keep kind of the energy shifting a little bit so things don't get stagnant. And then just making a really conscious choice to not include anything that you don't value. So if you don't value, like if you've literally identified that you don't value scrolling through your YouTube feed or scrolling through Instagram or turning on the TV to watch the news, because you have literally listed that it is a trigger for you to consume too much media, and then you recognize that you're doing it and that you're wasting your own time by doing that, that's really self-defeating. So just start from a place of kindness. Recognize that for some reason you are caught in a loop of doing things that you don't value, and try and just gently pull yourself back in. And then just come up with some kind of system that works for you to map it out. And then along with that, you may want to jot down a few ideas for navigating triggers. So for me, the very first thing is to recognize that I'm triggered. So that will come like in the form of recognizing my breathing, recognizing my mood, recognizing how much general muscle tension I have, and recognize if my thoughts are racing and if I'm completely identified with my thoughts or if I'm actually grounded in my body. And then the next thing for me is to disengage, like to physically remove myself from that trigger as soon as I can, as soon as I possibly can. And then just taking time to pause and reflect before resuming my regular routine. So if I have gotten off track somehow, I don't want to mindlessly just go back into my routine. I want to actually be present enough to recognize how I got off track. What was I maybe trying to avoid? What was I feeling that I didn't want to own? And then gently bring myself back into my routine. And then I think also it's really important to maybe create a toolkit of grounding activities for yourself. So that could be anything like a playlist of music that you find centering, just going through and also creating like a watch list or a saved list of your favorite meditation videos, so that when you go, for example, onto YouTube, you're instantly going to be hooked into like, oh, but maybe this is better. Ooh, maybe that one's better. Maybe that's the perfect solution right now. I totally get that. But if you just can gently say to yourself, no, I already made a decision. I've created this watch list of really helpful for example, 10-minute meditations that I can do to get myself back in my body, I'm just going to veer over into that lane and go right over to that. And it's just like that gentle redirect to stay focused. And then something that I do is I'll just save anything. Like if something comes up, I'll just quickly save it to like a watch later list or something. And that's kind of satisfies a little bit of the rabbit hole mentality without it getting too off track. And then just, have you created a safe space for your house, or have you created a safe space for yourself? So do you have like literally, even if it's just one space in your current living situation where you can go to kind of get regrounded? So maybe that is something as simple as a small area on the floor that is cleared for you to put some cushions down or to lay a blanket down, or because there is something that's literally really grounding about getting close to the ground. And I guess I haven't talked about that, but even like getting down on the ground and putting your stomach on the ground. I mean, if you think of like going to the beach and on a beautiful day and laying in the sun and just having like that belly contact with you and the ground, and how that feels kind of so connected, and that you can kind of gently sense the curve of the earth. It's like you're kind of hugging and wrapping the curve of the earth with your whole body. And that has a really kind of grounding and centering effect as well. So yeah, like physically get low, get down to the ground. So I don't know, again, just I've found this helpful. I realize this is just something that I got at Kmart here, but now that I say that, I realize that even on my website, I've created one. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I created one and did the little drawings on it. So you can, since you probably can't get to Kmart right now, and if you're not in New Zealand, you can go and just download that free weekly planner as well. So again, it's about, I think in my previous video, I talked about kind of structure versus flexibility. In a way, this is not any different. It's just that maybe our options have been more limited based on the number and frequency, or the number of things that we can go do in the day and the number of people that we interact with. But in some ways, that all has kind of a lot of clutter to it. And so think of this period of time that you've maybe been gifted as a way to just do some housekeeping, some mental housekeeping, and kind of reassess what you really value, where you want to be spending your time as life moves forward. And even if you maybe, as things eventually return to a new version of normal, think about what you would like to do different and what you would like to carry forward from what you've learned from like this kind of induced stillness blip in our world right now. So I hope that was maybe a little bit helpful. Thank you for joining me. I can't guarantee exactly when I'll be back to share something with you, but I hope that it's soon and that I can get back into the rhythm of it. So please look after yourself and your loved ones, be kind to your neighbors, and just stay focused. I mean, you can either panic or focus, and it's okay to feel super panicky. Just try and let it pass through you. Know that it's really normal, and then just try to get focused. So take care and bye for now. Thanks for joining me this week on the Hill with Jill podcast. You can find all my free resources, including menu planners, mindful movement videos, and more, as well as my coaching and courses at hillwithjill.com. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd share it with a friend. Take care and bye for now.